splitter and you can't see the top.
Yeah, or the bottom. I'm trying to get it on the screen so it's secondary. All right, I need another strategy here.
Pulse coding stuff is done in baseband. So with movies, it's less efficient.
I think the FHS, I think is the clients.
What about now if you try and use this side
National
to go to the share the screen, see if that affects it?
That's an interesting question. I could really blow it up.
It doesn't appear that's doing anything.
It's the duplicate's not the driver, it's just not the
Yeah,
Also,
it
it seems like adding in like
But they, I did
simple
simple.
something.
Oh, you can get these windows. Well, I don't have anything, so I'm trying to control the window here. I minimize this so I can work with it.
Yeah.
And I can drag it around.
Gotcha.
That's my strategy.
Yeah.
Stupidly.
So our difficulty is that in order for, we really want to use the full functionality of Alex's sort of my supercomputer and laptop.
Like a personal supercomputer.
Yeah, to show you some of that video functionality, but try and marry that with the sharp challenge.
We'll have something to work with her in a second. I might just have them hang some demos. It'll be really realistic animation. It'll be 3D. Just imagine me pixelated. Alright, so now if I switch back, I think I might control these windows. Here we go. 2, 3, projector only.
Yeah, it's good. Folks are still coming. Come on in.
I was told so. Some people are here. Next downstairs, they're looking for quarters, putting the meter. Okay. Well, that's good. We haven't started yet.
That's okay.
Oh my God.
Oh, okay. How about this one? Okay. Now let's see if I go full screen here. Which side is this on? Oh yeah, there we go. That's good. That's a good sign. Okay, forward to that. Might be able to fake organization. So, I can just do that if I want to drag that over there and play that. And then there we go. I think we can work with this.
Okay. So
I'll say the demos for last, just so that if everything goes to hell. So the demos will not punctuate my boring presentation. We'll have to conclude with them.
how are we doing on the AV? Okay, we're good. All right, so welcome everyone who's here. I'm going to be talking to you for just 2 seconds about our speaker today, Alex St. John, but briefly, I'm Owen Guthrie. I work for UAF e-learning and distance education. And we, Dan Lasoda and Alex St. John and I were in Anchorage Friday for the UA system-wide gaming conference called Serious Fun, and Alex was the keynote speaker there. And his presence here is provided by UAA. They managed to raise funds for his plane ticket to Alaska from New Zealand. So we're very, very thankful to Dave Danberg and Jeanette Renaudino who made this possible. As I said, I'm Owen. As it turns out, I've known Alex since I was in high school. Alex is a local Fairbanks kid. He actually grew up in the bush on St. Michael.
St. George Island.
St. George. I always get the George, the St. wrong. Anyway, St. George Island.
So many of them.
And grew up over here on Gold Hill Road and on Chena Ridge. Went to West Valley. Went to UAF for a couple years in the CS department. Before, as he says, he finally got out of college and went and got a real job. He has a long and illustrious career in the computer graphics industry. Many of you know that. I want to get right to Alex speaking, so I won't go through the details of that. But he was one of the 3 founding members of DirectX, had a long and disruptive career inside Microsoft, went on to found Wild Tangent. After that, it's one of the most successful online game companies ever, and was most recently CEO of High Five. And, come on in, gentlemen. No, you're good. Grab a cookie, grab something, sit down. We're just about to start. One of Alex's areas of interest, believe it or not, is the supercomputer. And when I first recontacted Alex a few months ago, he said, "Oh, let me show you my machine Goliath." running this incredible, NVIDIA's most fancy supercomputer on a chip. He's going to tell you all about that. The Tesla K40. And he's doing a lot of CUDA programming. So anyway, long story short, I said, when you have to come to Fairbanks, you have to tell the fine folks about that. So without further ado,
All right, thank
we'll
you, Owen.
start.
Yeah, all right. I got a classroom full of nerds. It's good to be home. I used to be you guys a long time ago, back when I had hair. All right, how many computer science majors do we have here? All right, how many of you guys play video games? They were going to get along fine. All right. Well, as Owen said, I have a very strange and storied background. I actually grew up here. This is my hometown. Lived out in the bush, and my parents had a cabin here in the summer that I never graduated school. I did a couple of years at the University of Alaska in spite of that by testing in, then needed a job. So I ended up weirdly at Microsoft by various and circuitous means, and by even stranger means ended up in charge of all gaming strategy. I won't bore you with the story, but it's a great one. Read my blog, alexstjohn.com, there you go. I have lots of favorite subjects. Since I'm doing 2 speaking sessions, I figured what I'd do is make this one a little more formal and just tell you some cool stuff and show you some technology. And then during the second one, when we kind of talk about the state of the art of the game industry, leave that one a little more conversational. You guys ask questions, throw it at me. I've been in the making game technology with some of the game industry's greatest, most famous developers for a long time. I know a lot of them. And so I've been immersed in it quite a while. So if you kind of want to know what the trends are, what's happening, who's doing what, and so forth, I can illuminate lots of those subjects if there are things that are interesting to you there. Okay? So now we're over here. The cookies are right there. Get the cookie first. There you go. Now take a seat. Right over here. You might need 2 cookies. You're a big guy. You're going to need there's more cookies there. All right. So I actually learned to program because my dad was working on a PhD here when I was a kid. So when I was, I must have been 10 or 11, he used to leave me at the library at the supercomputer cluster. That was a Honeywell mainframe back then. And I used to play video games on the 300-baud teletype printer there. So I played a game called Trek, a little 8x8 matrix game where you ran through a ream of paper in about 15 minutes, just I can still hear it. And all the graduate students would be all there at night with their cards, loading their box of cards, their punch cards in the machine to load their code up to see if they can get their program to run. And once in a while, somebody would drop their cards all over the floor, just break down weeping with rage and frustration. Those were the days. So I taught myself to program on that old thing. My first personal computer was the Commodore VIC-20. This was my baby. And I jacked this thing up. See, that was the default configuration. I jacked it up to 24K of RAM. So I had the coolest computer in the neighborhood even then. This was my first heterogeneous parallel processing computer because, of course, it had the 6502 CPU and the Motorola 6560 GPU, which was capable of 16 colors and an incredible 176 by 184 resolution. And there was a very mysterious formula for calculating what you could display where in order for that to work. And so that's when I actually first started my home programming back when I was a kid. I think I started programming this thing maybe when I was 14, around that age. Weirdly, growing up in Alaska in the bush, as many of you probably aware, you have 9 months of winter, no access to media, and limited contact with other human beings, which makes us all kind of weird people, although I'm sure we don't realize it. And so I developed strange and unusual interests as a child, and one of them was in quantum simulation of physics with a computer. That was my dream, was, I think that we could actually simulate physics on a computer. So when I got a little bit older, I started sending myself to SIGGRAPH conferences in the early and mid-'80s. I didn't have a lot of formal education in mathematics. And at that time, SIGGRAPH was pretty much an academic. All the researchers came, and they were all really physicists trying to figure out if they could simulate light. And a lot of the math was very physics or quantum mechanics based. And they were very busy trying to produce the most realistic photograph they could using all the crazy supercomputing time that they could possibly compute and generate a picture after days of computation. A ray trace sphere was just a huge thrill. And of course, at one point, Pixar was presenting there. So some of the legends I actually, didn't know, but the people I took their classes and courses from were some of the legends in 3D. I have some of these original books and SIGGRAPH papers these guys published. And so these are the guys I learned a lot of my 3D from. And again, of course, I liked games. I was making crude games on my VIC-20, but it wasn't really my central fascination. I actually, like Owen and I spent many, many long hours playing Call of Cthulhu at his parents' house. Role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons. I was from that set. Probably a lot of you guys are too, I suspect. Maybe in the more modern World of Warcraft domain. But I liked gaming a lot, but I actually was really interested in science fiction and physics and artificial intelligence and those kinds of things. So I went and studied under these guys, kind of self-tutor in 3D. And a really strange thing happened to me. And oh yeah, I wasn't sure if the slide was going to show the full resolution. You ever have one of those points in your life, and when you're a dumb kid, you're growing up, and I hope all of you have this experience. So I want to tell you what it's like in advance so that you don't do what I did, which was completely miss it when it happened. Right? It's the moment in your career when you actually do something great and don't realize it until a decade later because it was kind of an accident. You just were kind of trying to make something happen, and you try to do that all the time, and something actually sticks. And very often, since most of the things you try to accomplish in life don't stick, you're kind of used to it failing. So it's a kind of a shock to your system, and you're in denial when it actually sticks and suddenly becomes a thing. And so when I was working at Microsoft, I was in charge of designing the Windows 95 and NT print architecture and all the printing strategy and publishing stuff, because all of my incredible expertise in quantum physics and 3D boiled down to being able to write print drivers better than other people. That's what got me in, because of course I had no college degree, so I got hired into Microsoft to re-architect Microsoft's printing strategy in the early 90s, around 92. And after succeeding at that, they said, hey, Alex, what do you think about tackling gaming? Because there's graphics involved in that, and you're kind of the graphics guy, and like games. So I was asked to have a 3D, well, actually, I was asked to have a gaming strategy for Microsoft. And I did a huge amount of research and consumer marketing, and I got all these, I wrote this brilliant treatise called Taking Fun Seriously, and Taking Fun Seriously 2 was the one I wrote a year later, which was here's what Microsoft should do, and here's why Microsoft should focus on gaming, and here's why it's a great strategy for the company, here's how it relates to all the product groups, and here's all the research that supports my argument, and I circulated it to the executive chain going, we should do gaming. And went all the way up to Bill Gates, and after a long pause, I got a thank you for your input. And so I remember I went going to my manager and saying, Rick, I don't know what to do here. This is the right strategy. You asked me to take on gaming. This is what you guys got to do if you want to have a gaming strategy. But I just got a polite meh. And Rick said, so what are you going to do next? I go, well, what do you mean? I thought I'd go to my management and say, management, do something to help me out. And he's like, nah, the answer is going to be, if you have to ask, the answer is going to be no, Alex. So now what are you going to do? I don't know what you mean, Rick. He goes, well, do you believe it's the right thing for the company to do? Well, yeah. Do you believe it enough to risk getting fired for it? Well, I don't know. And he goes, well, why don't you just ask yourself that? And so I did. And myself and a couple of friends got together and started a Skunkworks project. And I ran up all the contract development fees for the early prototype of DirectX on my credit card without permission from the company. And so we started a secret project called the Manhattan Project to create Direct 3D. And what's in DirectX originally, but the second generation produced Direct 3D. So I produced Direct Sound, Direct Play, the Direct Input APIs, Direct Draw, Direct Video, and in the second generation, the Direct 3D APIs. And just the three of us made all that shit up by ourselves. We just fabricated every API. Which, looking back is kind of funny because we weren't experts in any of it, but we just said, we'll just make up the entire gamut of media architecture. We'll just read some textbooks and find our way in the dark and ask some gaming guys what we should do. And so as a consequence, what's funny is that original Taking Fun Seriously that ended up in a dumpster, it was the plan we executed against with no approval. And of course, as you guys all know, gaming became a huge thing at Microsoft. So what's funny is that if I look back at this ancient document that got read and thrown in the garbage can, here's some of the things I said back then to try to justify this that nobody listened to. And so here's some direct quotes from the 1994 Taking Fun Seriously. So I said, to keep the PC a viable platform against the onslaught of 3D accelerated, that was the PlayStation 1 with crude Painter's algorithm 3D back then. You need to Windows 95 needs support 3D to enable access to 3D technology for a large number of multimedia title producers, which will in turn demand for 3D hardware accelerators among consumers. So my argument was that one of the problems Microsoft had is they were just a software architecture. And weirdly, Microsoft had a weird competitive relationship with Intel. Because although Microsoft and Intel were always seen as deeply intertwined, Intel wasn't happy of being completely Microsoft's bitch. And so what Intel would try to do is they didn't like the fact that there were other people making hardware for the PC that competed with the use of the CPU. They wanted the CPU to do everything. So Intel would write software libraries for modems, for networking, for sound, for graphics that ran on the CPU to replace hardware drivers, so they tried to put the other hardware vendors out of business. And Intel also deliberately constrained the bandwidth that the PCI bus, or what became the PCI bus, the PC bus, could support in order to make it hard for vendors to add a lot of value by being able to access memory quickly. So that was kind of, they go ahead and drag their feet on how fast a PC bus could get, because that kept the competitors under control. And of course, my job as a strategist for Microsoft was to try to find a way to make sure Microsoft kept control over that. My strategy in this book was to say, we need a huge market, a diverse market of competing through hardware. Lots of different kinds of hardware we need out there. That depends on Windows to enable it. So that Intel can't lift up an abstract Microsoft Windows and set it aside. So to do that, we said, I'm going to make a media architecture that plumbs through to all kinds of hardware, and we're going to go to all these hardware companies and say, compete, go kill each other for 3D support, kill each other for sound support, make joysticks that require digital input, which didn't exist on the PC at that time. So the entire DirectX strategy was to create a multimedia driver architecture that enabled a competitive market for consumer 3D hardware. So the original strategy is, I want lots of consumer 3D hardware, do fuck Intel. You can blip that 5-second thing on the internet. Sorry.
Got it.
Sorry. But that's, you know. To force Apple and IBM into a follow the position with a very compelling media technology. So, of course, you know, our job was to make Apple and IBM our bitches by running off in a different direction from the one they were in, getting everybody excited about it, and, oh, you're 2 years behind because we surprised you. To establish credibility and serve as a placeholder for newer 3D technology from ACT. So this was the killer. So ACT, you see, it wasn't my job to do any of this stuff. And Bill Gates had a secret strategy for 3D under Nathan Myhrvold. They were building a secret Microsoft 3D chip architecture. And I knew about it peripherally. So as a kind of wave to them, I go, hey, whenever your bullshit comes along, yeah, this is just we enable the market or something. I don't even know what it is, but we'll just give you a nod so you don't say no to us doing this. And this turned out to have very interesting consequences. And then I said the battle of the 3D API on the console and under DOS is just beginning, largely fought by 3 major players, and these were the leading software libraries that game developers were using back then, because there was no 3D hardware. So if you want a 3D game on the PC, you license one of these engines to make a software engine out of it. They all, of course, ran like crap, but that was the best the PC could do back then. With the opportunity to buy the most respected player, we can immediately draw huge attention from the entire game industry. Basically, we're saying, let's go buy one of these guys so everybody knows we're doing gaming. The likely impact on new title generation under Windows from such an announcement will have a revolutionary impact on the PC game industry. So that was just some hyperbole I wrote back then. And then this is what I said on realism. Games are technology-driven. Each new generation of game model must be more realistic and more intelligent to satisfy the average game player. New consoles introduced will have hardware so you can read it. But the quote was, any of these technologies that we can make available for the market, first is a win. Better immersion, more realistic sound. So I was just trying to make the case for this is the way to go in Microsoft. These guys were spreadsheet. Remember, what was a great Microsoft game in 1994? Anybody want to name a Microsoft game from back then? What?
Minesweeper?
Good, yeah, that's not bad. They had some better ones. Solitaire. Look, you're making it hard for me. Golf and flight sim. What? Funny, no. Actually, the Julia Child's Wine Guide. Don't you guys all have a copy of that? No. Microsoft Dogs and Cats. Doesn't ring any bells. Microsoft Bob. How about the McZ claymation titles? Did you see any of Microsoft's great claymation games? They were actually literally claymation games. No hits from your childhood there? Ah, gosh, I don't know how to relate to you people. So that was what Microsoft was producing for games back then. So in 1994, we shipped the first prototype of DirectX. Again, it was all bootstrapped. My management was in my office going, Alex, have you turned any credit card reports lately? Oh, I'll get to it. I'm busy. Excuse me. Read my blog for some of the side stories, but I did all kinds of just outrageous things to the best of my ability without any authority to do it. In 1994, we launched 95, we launched DirectX. We completed the acquisition of RenderMorphics, a British company for the RenderMorphics API. And the funny thing is, I actually had been working in England prior to Microsoft recruiting me. And one of the biggest frustrations I had at the time, is that the British engineers were brilliant mathematicians, really well educated. And in America, I couldn't find mathematicians, software engineers who had the mathematics skills to do 3D. This didn't exist in any volume in the US. So all of the 3D engine companies dominantly located in the UK, both Criterion, Argonaut, and RenderMorphics, all from the UK. There was one we also looked at buying that wasn't from the UK, which I'll come back to in a second. Actually, maybe two, but one that's got a historical note here. So I said, I need British engineers to do this. If we want to make a 3D API, I want a team of Brits with this kind of math background. So we acquired RenderMorphics, which had 8 engineers, moved them all to Redmond, Washington, and that was the early Direct 3D team. Okay. Now, let me see if I'm going to jump around here. This is a little bit out of sequence, but we'll come back to it. In the course of launching Direct 3D, DirectX by 95 had become huge. Of the games and applications that shipped for Windows 95, we hijacked the Windows operating system. We slipped APIs into Windows that allowed our separate DirectX libraries to shut the operating system down so games could take over. And then we did that in the operating system without permission. I wrote the autoplay code for Windows 95. So autoplay was something I wrote the very first autoplay game, Freddy Fish, children's title that I worked with the local game studio to try, and we just slipped that code into Windows 95. So Windows 95, we just kind of wired with dynamite to ship DirectX with games, and the games could just go in there and go shut down all the crap that was in the way and just run. So nobody at Microsoft really knew we'd done this. Microsoft Windows 95 ships, all these games flood out, including Doom for Windows, Pitfall Harry, Mech Warrior, just a flood of titles come out using DirectX. All these DirectXs, they're taking our code, shipping it with the game. You install the game on Windows 95, DirectX calls Windows and says, just get out of the way, shut up, turn off the graphics, give me control of memory, and the games would run beautifully. And then I called the press and was like, yeah, Windows 95 plays games great. Microsoft's totally committed to games. So we made Windows 95 rock for games. So the press is all over, yes, Microsoft makes games, they love games, they're supporting games. And then, of course, I was getting hell. Microsoft, what are you saying to the press? Stop this rumor. We don't have a gaming studio. Who's doing this? So it caused enormous scandals at Microsoft that somehow they were hugely successful with games and nobody knew exactly why. And then the numbers came down. Half of all of the best-selling Windows 95 applications were games built on DirectX. The #1 searched for keyword on Microsoft's website for the first time was DirectX. And it was the first Microsoft keyword that actually surpassed searching for the word sex on Microsoft's website, which was #1 up until that point. We even considered making a direct sex API just so we could get all the sex searches too. And by the way, it has been almost, 20 years since those APIs were shipped, and DirectX is still the #1 search for keyword on Microsoft's website today. So if you go to the download page, it's DirectX, DirectX, DirectX. Apple's market share went. Within 3 years, its market share collapsed to less than 1%. And remember, Apple brought back Steve Jobs, and all of the former management crept off into the shadows, hoping that Jobs would ride it to its grave. So it was extremely devastating to Apple's market share. There we go. So in the course of doing that, I did a tour of Japan to launch DirectX to the Japanese, and they all thought that was really cool. And on a trip home from Japan, we got a last-minute meeting with Sega's Irimajiri and Yu Suzuki. Yu Suzuki was the famous Japanese game designer for the Virtual Fighter. He was the guy driving the Dreamcast Vision. And we met with Irimajiri at the last minute, and the funny conversation in the car is over. So James Spawn, who was my Japanese evangelist, said, hey, Alex, I think I could get you a last-minute meeting with Irimajiri before we go to the airport. Do you guys want to meet with him? And Eric Engstrom and I were in the car together going, well, what would we say to Sega? And that, well, if we're going to have a meeting with the president of the company and one of their most famous game designers, we should tell him we should put a Microsoft OS as his next console. Yeah, let's try that. So we went to the meeting and said, you know what you should do for the next Sega? You should make a Microsoft operating system on DirectX. Here's why it'd be a great idea. And amazingly, he went, let's talk about that. So Eric and I were getting on the plane going, oh, how are we going to deal with this? So we immediately went back to our superiors and reported, we got a little problem. You know that thing we started that got everybody's attention that really don't have any authority for? Well, Sega wants to make a Microsoft OS for the next Dreamcast. And so that immediately got taken out of our hands and handed to important people who were in charge to fuck up for us. So by 1996, they negotiated a huge deal with Sega to build the Dragon OS for the next generation Sega Dreamcast. Microsoft and Sega had a huge strategic relationship. And this is what got Microsoft into the console business. So funny enough, Nathan and Bill got themselves committed to consoleness because they got really excited about doing a deal with Sega to have a Microsoft OS on a game console for the first time. How'd the Dreamcast go, you guys? You got the Dreamcast 4 for Christmas, right? Oh, it just sank. Right, I got a picture somewhere. Somebody brought me a old Sega Dreamcast that shows the Dragon OS on it. That was the Microsoft OS running on it. So Sega sank, nothing to do with Dragon, of course, but it was a complete failure, and that left Microsoft kind of, I think, finally Bill and those guys were going, oh, crap, we were kind of excited about that idea. So along came Talisman. So remember that line I made about the secret stuff I didn't know much about that ACT was doing? Remember those famous graphics luminaries that I studied under at SIGGRAPH, who were all the guys who wrote the books on it? Well, I didn't know this at the time, but Microsoft had hired all of them. And they were all working in the advanced research group to build a new super consumer 3D chip secretly at Microsoft that Microsoft intended to deploy to the entire PC industry and say, here's the new Microsoft graphic chip you all are going to sell, we're going to own it. And so all these famous guys from the game industry, from the physics community and academia, were secretly working on this new Talisman API and super chip. Once DirectX came out there and be really successful, became hugely famous, they kind of said, well, that was cute, you guys. Thanks for your effort there, but we're in charge of 3D now. And so we want to replace your Direct 3D crap with our new Talisman architecture. And here's let me see if I can get this to work for you. Here's the promo video, if I can get this to play. Hang on a second here. I'm not going to do any fancy, like, expand this, because who knows, but here's the original Talisman promo video. I'm going to brave it. Oh. So this was their vision for consumer gaming. This was amazing Pixar graphics back then. This was 1995, state-of-the-art in consumer animation. So I know you want to see the rest of this. I'm not going to make you watch it all. It's on YouTube. So the punchline was that you got a bunch of brilliant guys. I mean, I was a huge fanboy of all these guys. I was just like, I got your books, I read everything, we autographed it. And they didn't know anything about gaming, but they were in charge of it. So they were like, Bill, we're going to do this in real time on Microsoft-controlled video chips. We're going to go to every major video chip company and say, listen, you're out of business, but you can license this and make these chips here for Windows, because that's all we're going to support. And then thanks for that direct 3D thing, you guys. We're just going to jack that up with our Talisman shit and replace the API so that it supports this brilliantly. I found myself in a really weird position because I looked at the technology and the ideas and I said, this is terrible. This is the dumbest idea ever. And we've already won. Why go force all the chip vendors to make a special hardware architecture that we have that's monolithically designed by Microsoft and won't involve any competition or competitive innovation when we just made a 3D API that lets them all go to town against each other trying to support our API better? We don't have to make any hardware at all. There are bitches, and we get lots of competition, which will cause lots of innovation, which is what we wanted. But I said, this is a dumb idea. We shouldn't have done this at all, which, you know, is a popular point of view. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get out of this now. Oh, no, it just insists on, yeah, there we go. No, it really wants us to see all of it. Hang on one second, pardon me. Here we go.
So they've clearly never seen a computer game, but there was depth of field, there was awesome texture filtering.
Yeah.
Obviously, where they absolutely love that.
Well, and, you know, here, since we're all nerds here in the room, what is the surviving remnant of Talisman in the Direct 3D API that everybody uses to this day? What part of Talisman made it to the present common usage in Direct 3D and all gaming hardware? But anisotropic filtering would be correct. So that was what survived what is about to come next. So I found myself in the weird position of going, you guys are my heroes, you rock. That's the dumbest fucking idea I've ever heard. I gotta stop you, I'm sorry. I have to go, you can't do that to my game developers because I've got them. We already won, this isn't unnecessary, in fact it's a bad idea. And so that was a very strange position to find myself in, because personally I had a great relationship with them. I had to go, look, I love you guys. Can you autograph my book, please? I gotta tell Bill you're stupid, though. I'm sorry. Then, as part of this, Microsoft's huge initiative to try to take over 3D, they acquired Softimage. So they licensed OpenGL from SGI. They put a gun to SGI's head and said, if you want a Windows NT license, which you need to survive because Unix going by the way, you're going to license this OpenGL to put on Windows NT. We're going to make our own proprietary 3D chips for the consumer market to displace your dying SGI standard. And we're going to buy Softimage, which is one of the leading tools for 3D modeling and animation, because we just want to own all of that stuff. Classic, good Microsoft strategy there. So we buy Softimage. All of this culminates in, so the DirectX stuff is just rolling through the market. Game developers are sucking it up. It's just sweet. It's driving all the sales. And of course, at this point, you know, Microsoft people are going, wow, those guys were cute, and that was really nifty. Thanks, but we'll own all of that stuff you invented now, so hand that over to us. So DirectX got handed to the Talisman team to you know, do the right stuff with. But I was left in charge with strategy. Yeah, it's funny. Well, lots of good stories in that. So a conflict arose. The conflict was the Windows 95 team and the Windows NT teams hated each other. They were in mortal conflict with each other. Microsoft had licensed OpenGL for SGI and put it in Windows NT to get high-end CAD applications of the movie guys. No intention of doing anything with gaming, not even a thought to it. When Windows 95 came along, we said, well, we'd like a 3D API. Let's just go ask our OpenGL guys if we can have a license put it on Windows 95. We'll just use that. I don't have to screw around with British to require anything. Well, the NT guys went, Windows 95 is a temporary operating system and it's crap. No, you can't have our OpenGL license. Screw you guys. Which is when Eric Engstrom said, all right, fuck them. We'll just make up a 3D API. We'll pull it out of our butts and just roll right over them. Fuck them. Alex, are you on board for that? Dude, there's no way we're going to invent our own 3D API that somebody uses. Do you have any idea what it takes to make a 3D API? Because come on, Alex, you know 3D. Just solve it. Fix it. I go, dude, we're going to get plowed. We have no charge to do this. All of the geniuses are on the other side. They own the OpenGL license. And he was just like, dude, I'm going to go and try this. If you're not going to back me up, then, you know, step off. But otherwise, you need to do this. Suck it up. Get behind us. Go, dude, we're totally going to fail. But okay, I'll try. And so I agreed, thinking it was madness, to go, let's just make our own 3D API to screw those guys. So we just went ahead, acquired RenderMorphic, said we're going to put our own 3D. And the problem with it succeeding wildly was what happened. The NT guys are supposed to replace Windows 95. But Windows 95 has an entire magic media, 500 new media APIs that everybody uses that are entirely responsible for its success that aren't anywhere in Windows NT. They were doing some other shit over here that they thought would be cool, but nothing to do with gaming. So the rage and the battle just went on across Microsoft. And what was interesting is it completely spilled into the industry. The OpenGL guys started going, OpenGL could work for games. But we like games too. But we should own games. Let's go call our friends in the game industry, or hell, let's quit. Go to the game companies, then demand OpenGL from id, which is what Mike Abrash did. So there was no demand in the game industry for OpenGL. The game industry was just like, yeah, we'll use whatever proprietary hardware we can get our hands on. Standards, boy, that's crazy. We'd just be magic if we had any hardware to do 3D on. You know, Glide will work. There were all kinds of crap 3D APIs at that time. So Microsoft was at war with itself over OpenGL and Direct3D. We were at war with ourselves over Talisman versus OpenGL versus everybody hated everybody. Finally, Bill Gates says, and Nathan Myhrvold say, look, let's have a multimedia strategy day where cookies right over there. Grab a cookie. You may not even be here for this session. Grab a cookie and go before anybody notices. Oh, all right, you are here for it. Awesome. You can keep the cookie. So Bill Gates says we need to have a strategy day to try to come together on this because the conflict's just tearing the company apart. So Bill says, Alex, I want you to organize this for me. Now think about that. So what was funny is all this battling, I actually had a high level of contact. I used to be a speech coach for Bill Gates. I used to travel with him, so I'm going to say and so forth. I had a lot of access to him for some reason. And even though I was this force of chaos and sneakiness within the company, Bill seemed to appreciate it for whatever reason. He seemed to be happy that we were just kind of running away with the show. And so he gave me a lot of credibility by association that he didn't give other people. I don't know why. I think whatever was going on, he was happy to see us just driving the hell out of gaming at Microsoft. So he kind of let me keep running Rampage. So that's the funny thing is, yeah, it was a skunkworks effort. We didn't have permission. I should have been fired for 50 different perfectly good reasons. And at the very top of the company, they just kind of went, let's let those guys go crazy. I kind of like what's going on here. So there was a weird sense. Bill was sitting back eating popcorn and enjoying the show. And he says, Alex, I want you to organize this. I go, really? Well, I'll be happy to pull together the peace forum between all the warring factions. So at Microsoft, I got to choose all the seating, invite all the guests, write the agenda. I got to do all of this. So in choosing the seating, of course, I set up two sides of the auditorium. I put all of Microsoft's OpenGL and Talisman guys on this side of the room and all the famous academics and PhDs over here. And then I brought in a bunch of people from the game industry over on the left side of the room. I brought in Tim Sweeney. Anybody know his name? Unreal Engine. I brought in Seamus Blackley. Unfortunately, Carmack couldn't make it, but I had a good relationship with him. And then these are the guys from the graphics side. So, and I set Bill Gates right up the front on one side, and I sandwiched him with Tim Sweeney and Seamus Blackley. Put them on either side of him. And I set Nathan on the other side with his bunch of geniuses. And I said, I'm going to let them all do their stuff first. Let them get up there. And they, you know, Kajia got up there and demonstrated. He's like, all right, I've got a dual Pentium. Each Pentium on here is 90 megahertz. It's got a gigabyte of RAM. And I am now going to demonstrate rendering a Phong-shaded cube in real time. And it was like, ah! Real-time graphics! It's so amazing! And then, yeah, I know, and I was, you should have seen Blackley and Sweeney's faces. They were like, by the way, to get Tim Sweeney out here, he was like 18. He was living with his parents. And on the scale, I know we got some nerds in the room here. We're nothing. I mean, we'll have girlfriends long before Tim Sweeney will ever marry, I think. He's a great guy. You know, and Tim Sweeney lived with his parents back then. And I go, hey, I'd like to invite Tim Sweeney out. He's got one of the most famous game engines in history. I'd like to invite Tim Sweeney out to meet Bill Gates. And they're going, yeah, you got to talk to my mom. What? Yeah, my mom wants to talk to you. Hello, Mrs. Sweeney. Yeah, I want to make sure Tim's never been on an airplane before, and I want to make sure that what hotel will be staying at, who will be looking after him. Your son's going to meet Bill Gates. Yeah, and he has a very specific diet. It's important he eats the right things and stuff. So I had to talk his mom to assure her that I'd look after him, I'd make sure he has a hotel, that he'd eat his right things, he'd get on his planes and so forth. And then assure him that, you know, like pedophiles wouldn't get her or something. She just completely, your son's going to meet Bill Gates. He'll be fine. It's going to be really cool. It's a huge honor. Just like that, Bill, who, Just, my son wants to get on a plane, and I don't know if I want him to be playing with you Microsoft people. So I got Sweeney out there, and Blackley, of course, was a physicist, and he worked on Trespasser, DreamWorks, and these other companies. Brilliant guy. And set him on either side of Bill, and I just let the ACT guys just go show all their just trivial crap, because they can each get up. Here are my PhDs, and here are my books, and here are my papers, and look, a spinning cube. I just let that go on. And then I go, okay, Seamus, your turn. And he gets up and he goes, is it all right if I use this dual Pentium 90? I already set it up. And yeah, they're like, oh yeah, sure, go ahead. And he goes, this is Trespasser. And dinosaurs go running across the screen. There's terrain off into the infinite horizon and trees everywhere and water, barrels bobbing in the water and simulated three-dimensional stereo sound as the guy's being chased around by a T-Rex, and every footfall, when the T-Rex runs into a tree, the crashing sound was all procedurally generated. And Seamus is running in software on that thing there, and everybody just jaws hit the table. Bill was like, what do I pay you? And he said, what do I pay you people for again? Didn't like write that. And then Sweeney fires up the Unreal Engine with real-time first-person shooters and monsters running around, texture mapped and software and so forth. And everybody on that side of the room was just like, and Gates literally turns to Nathan. And what's funny is they were obviously very good friends, but he's like, what do I pay all your people for? And Nathan goes, I don't know, Bill. You could just see the room just went frozen back there, just quiet, just like, oh God, please let us crawl out. I'm so embarrassed at waiving my PhD before these children did this, before the kid whose mom had to let him here just destroy my life's work. Because I haven't read any of your books, I just made this shit up in my basement. Kick your asses, you monkeys. So it made a huge impression on Gates. And what happened as a consequence of that huge impression being made on Bill Gates? Anybody know? Which one of this list became a new Microsoft employee shortly thereafter? Seamus Blackley, that's right. So we'll come back to that, but I just want to point that out. So, then back to Talisman for a minute. So this was in the middle, just the battle was raging here. So Microsoft, after bending Talisman, the whole OpenGL war goes on, which I won't bore you with that story. Just read my blog for the stories, but there's some really outlandish stories. But they say, well, because everybody's demanding OpenGL, and market doesn't realize SGIs are total bitches now, and Microsoft owns OpenGL, and we're not going to tell everybody that, because the whole reason to do this deal with SGI was to save face. So let's pretend that we have a strategic, are you here for the session? The cookies are right there. You need it, no, we got a lot of bottles of water, too.
Just because I look like this doesn't mean I want cookies.
Believe me, I got a few cookies in my so what happened was, they said, let's do a deal with SGI where we're going to partner to make OpenGL even cooler. We're going to make it even cooler by making a new super OpenGL called Fahrenheit, which is OpenGL loaded with Talisman shit. And SGI is going to help us so that all the people crying for OpenGL support will be crying for Talisman without even knowing that's what they're demanding from Microsoft, because it just sounds like SGI is all over this new thing too. So they did a deal with SGI to go, okay, now that you guys are a bitch, you're going to agree to crap up OpenGL with Talisman. And so they did a huge deal. Here's the 97 announcement of the deal. And then here is 2 years later, the program ends in tears. I just want to sandwich, that was about a 2-year fantasy, because what happened? There was no stopping Direct3D at that point, just ate everything. Nothing they could do could stop Direct3D from just getting sucked up by the marketplace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to keep us on track, so we've got 15 minutes left in this session. We can run a little long, but we have another session starting tomorrow.
Understood. Sorry, probably I got so much material here. We haven't even gotten to the CUDA stuff yet. All right. Short of it is, who's this guy? Seamus Blackley. What's he holding? A direct Xbox. So Seamus got hired on the Direct3D team, killed all the Talisman stuff, made DirectX 8 and Direct3D 8, and he and Kevin Backus, who I hired to replace me after I left Microsoft, sold Bill Gates on making a game console of their own, given the sad failure of the Dreamcast, and took over the multimedia strategy. So we got some real gamers in there, and they made the Direct Xbox at Microsoft. And I want to get some other material. I'm going to skip these here. Let's get to some juicier stuff here real quickly. So this led to a very interesting thing, because remember, why was I involved in any of this in the first place? I I like playing games, but really I wanted to do physics. That's really why I got to be a 3D guy. And weirdly, the physics techniques I learned at SIGGRAPH were nothing like the things that we did for gaming. We were not going to have, in my lifetime, computers capable of ray tracing in real time, which was the coolest way to render 3D. The way you see it in the movies, when you look at a movie like Avatar, that's ray traced. That looks like, that's the good stuff. You can't do that in the game. Not possible. And not going to be possible in my lifetime from the 1980s point of view. So I was never going to get to do physics on real time and on the kind of scale I wanted to with GPUs. So we had to kind of make a sick, twisted, pathetic, bastardized version of 3D that produced the illusion of real 3D images through a huge, hacky collection of techniques that achieved the illusion of 3D without actually being real physics simulation. And oh well, you know, that's this career. Maybe my kids will get to work on computers like that. Well, something bizarre happened. The bizarre thing that happened was that Direct 3D was hugely successful. And it created multi-billion-dollar companies like ATI and NVIDIA. ATI has a $3 billion as acquired by AMD, and is now has a $3 billion market cap. NVIDIA, which I didn't tell the stories about, became which was nearly going out of business until they partnered with us to become an exclusive Direct 3D chip maker. And as a consequence of being the guys who just said, unlike all the other chip vendors who said, yeah, we'll play ball on the Talisman thing, NVIDIA said, no, I'm sticking with the Direct 3D guys. $11 billion market cap. So they just said, we'll bet on the guys, on the underdogs, while everybody else says we'll do what the executives tell us to do. And as a consequence, they became one of the biggest chip manufacturers and chip makers in the world. And then the interesting thing is the competition for 3D and the general software architecture as a result, and the limited Intel bus, because Intel was trying to screw these guys by keeping the bus narrow, well, a very weird thing happened. All of these chips, in order to compete, become increasingly generalized. So they went from being very specialized, vertical, hacky 3D chips to, in order to compete with one another, they actually became very general parallel architectures. And the other weird thing that happened that is to overcome this Intel bus limitations, they had to offload even more from the CPU. So they had to assume all the floating point and AI and physics calculations. If that stuff was getting done on the CPU, you just couldn't communicate back and forth fast enough to the graphics chip to drive the world. So those chips had to snarf up all the AI and physics capabilities up across the bus so that as much of the work the game could just say, I want this monster to run around, think, and interact with the world, and come back when you're done doing that. So the GPUs went from being a very specialized vertical graphic pipeline to being extremely general purpose, massively parallel supercomputers. So the modern GPU has 4 to 10 times the computing performance of a CPU per dollar. They also have about 4 times the transistors. Following Moore's law, unlike the CPU, they double in performance every 12 months instead of every 18 months, and both in transistors and performance. Increasingly general programming tools, there's all kinds of standard APIs for programming to them that have evolved that are not Direct 3D, which is what those chips were built to run. And in fact, the vast majority of the scientific computing community use a combination of OpenCL and increasingly CUDA to code directly to these GPUs. I'm working on, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it now, but I'm helping with a bunch of radio astronomers do pulsar research on GPUs, helping them port their code to CUDA in this case. So these architectures became the supercomputers I always dreamed I'd have to play with. So here are some, this is the new toy I just got. This is my Intel NVIDIA K40. It's an Atlas K40, fresh off the press. 12 gigabytes of RAM, it's actually more than this, over 300 gigabytes a second of memory. Roughly 1.4 teraflops of double precision, or about a little over 4 teraflops of single precision. 2,880 GPU cores on one card. And then here's the AMD equivalent, which is not quite as powerful, but it's really targeted. This is meant for pulsar searches and scientific research. This is not a gaming card. Well, I use it for one, but that's really overkill. I get all the cool toys to play with. Everybody, my son, all the friends want to come over and borrow the supercomputers to play the games on. But ridiculous horsepower, beyond anything I ever imagined. I never thought in my career I'd have this kind of power for, this thing here is like $1,000 on my desktop, and this one here is more like $6 grand. And worth it. It's amazing. So, where did we go here? I'm going to skim some of this. I just wanted to point this out because I was in New Zealand recently and met with Weta. And so, of course, I watch every 3D movie. I watch all the effects. I look at the techniques. I just compulsively, and I wondered why I was in New Zealand. I go, I got to meet with the Weta researchers. I want to talk to the guys who did the effects because some of them are amazing. And I realized I learned something I did not know. Remember the Hobbit barrel rider scene? That entire long sequence of them rolling down the rapids in the buckets and the barrels? There wasn't a single drop of water, of real water, in any of those scenes. This is all ray traced water. All physics computationally generated in CUDA by their scientists. So those dwarves were running around with barrels in themselves in the studio down hallways, acting like they were bobbing, and all that water is added computationally. And the water splashing in the barrels, they mocapped it, captured the 3D stuff, put it in the model, simulated the water for the dwarves splashing and interacting in it, and so the water is all rendered. I've never seen that before. So it's one of the Weta's little secrets. They did that all on CUDA graphics processors. So you're at a level of physics processing and realism that is, not only is the technique, the simulation they're doing is actually real physics based, but it is real and it is achievable in a modern computer. Today these GPUs are on every consumer device. So my cell phone, I don't have it in front of me, has 4 cores on it now. Following Moore's law, next year it'll have 8. Actually, I've got to skip that. The current Tesla K1 that was released has 172 cores. So my current phone has 4 cores because it's a year or 2 old. And my supercomputer at home has 3,000 cores. And so if I wanted to simulate a human brain with 100 billion cells, and I assumed that I needed some number of cores to simulate each neuron, let me see, I got 3,000 cores on one GPU now. Actually, I could get 10,000 by putting 3 boards in the card. So this year I could do 10,000 cores. Next year is 20,000, 40,000, 80,000. Oh, 10 years away, I'm at a million cores on my home computer. That's this lifetime. So incredible access to physics. The kind of computation you're talking about just being in your hands during your career is mind-boggling. And this is the part I love most about it. We'll come to that. Sorry, I'm going to skip through some stuff because I can't do all this stuff now, unfortunately. The short of it is that the power is mind-boggling. And one of the things that's absolutely most amazing to me is I love computer science. We've been programming on serial computers for a long time, and those of us who are really advanced, we can deal with threading and make stuff work on a few cores or even distribute it a bit. But when you start getting into tens of thousands to millions of cores, the way you think about programming completely changes. Data structures break down, the way you think about the bottlenecks break down. Everything you learn in computer science that's based on the old serial world with maybe a little parallelism loses its meaning fast. And you start realizing we got to rethink all of this. Our object-oriented languages are in the way we structure our code is in the way we debug and test code is obsolete. And so you guys are growing up in an era that is the boundaries between a very old world, everything's a Turing machine and serialized and human beings can comprehend it, to a world where the computing is so huge and so complex that it's more like coding DNA in an organic system than it is like writing code on my old VIC-20. And so one of the things I'd say to you guys is, though you're graduating as nerds now, you're entering a computer science field, or you may be entering a computer science field that is completely, or almost completely uncharted and uninvented. So everything you're learning here is already obsolete, and it's happening and changing quickly right now. You're right on that cusp, so it's a really exciting time. And I was saying to Owen, I go, I'm thrilled because I feel like Rip Van Winkle. I went to sleep as an engineer when I joined Microsoft and wasn't allowed to code ever again because I became management overhead. And then for 20 years, my time was wasted managing people producing large bodies of technology without writing a single line of code. And now that I've sold my various companies and I'm free to code again, it's like I woke up in the future and science fiction hardware I never dreamed I'd have to do the kind of physics I want was there for me because of something I did in the distant past, or certainly something I contributed to. And so that was it's a really exciting way to live. So I just, every night I sit in my garage going, don't wake me up, don't pinch me, this is too good to be true. I'm having the best time ever. So I'll show you, I have lots of, I actually wrote a whole bunch of technical slides, but I don't think we're going to have time to go through them in this form. On CUDA development and GPU programming. Owen is free to create other opportunities if need be to cover that stuff. But let me show you a little demonstration on this crappy laptop if I can get my mouse back here. let's see, I don't know what screen this is going to try to open on. So this is a 5-year-old laptop with only 200, 400 cores, something like that. So this is crap compared to my toys at home. I can't show you the stuff I'm working on because this laptop can't do it. No, that didn't work. Let me hang on. Switch. See if this comes up. Come on, make it, make it. There we go. So on my crappy 5-year-old laptop with 200 CUDA cores, this is running 16,000 particle simulation, n-body gravity simulation, and this is all being computed in real time. So I actually have done something much more advanced and nifty with this, which I'd love to show you, but I need my supercomputer to do it. So, and video just doesn't do it justice because it's much more fun to see in real time. But 16,000 real-time gravitationally simulated particles. My home machine runs millions of these in real time at thousands of frames a second. So it's amazing how many n-body, NP-complete kind of interactions you can simulate on these things. I will show you one more that I personally am very fond of. And again, I wish I could show you the more advanced incarnation of it, but one, it's kind of a secret because I don't want to reveal on Google everything I'm working on yet. And I don't want to do it a terrible injustice by running it on the crap machine. Oh, come on. Come on. Oh, jeez, it's in the freaking way. Let's see if I get to my desktop. So this is a crude, chopped down version of my stuff code I'm working with. If it runs, it's going to suck up all the memory on this GPU. It takes a minute to load. But what you're going to see here is a real-time physics simulation of a procedurally generated world. So there is no human artwork involved here. This is all computed. So the water physics are computed. And this is running, so like I said, it runs much better on the supercomputer. And then the scale and everything it does on the supercomputer with the artificial life simulation that grows the trees and plants looks much cooler, but that's my secret sauce so far. But this laptop can handle this. So real-time water physics, you got Perlin noise-generated terrain, Perlin noise-generated textures. The water is a type of noise generation function as well. It's arbitrarily large, so if I want to generate a world on anybody's computer from a seed, I can do that, and this thing's doing it all in real time. So one of the things I'm working on is building procedurally generated cloud-based worlds that can be streamed over the internet, so I can create huge ray trace looking universes with no artists. I want to grow everything with detailed physics simulation. So I am in absolute heaven because I can actually do it today, or approach doing it. By the time my code is working, which will take me a few years, the GPUs in the cloud will be just what I need to do this. So it's a really exciting time, certainly for me. And if you're a huge geek too, it's a huge exciting time for you because this is my handoff, right? Hey, I got 20 good years left on me, but this is going to define the world, your generation. I believe that in your career lifetimes, these kind of computers are going to be running artificial life no problem. I'm working on it now with my crude single-celled organisms and crude genetics, but I think that in your lifetime you might see paramecium or even larger multicellular organisms completely quantum simulated, maybe even in real time, because I think you're talking about computing power where that's feasible. Questions?
Alex, you've been talking about how that's basically a craptastic computer. Could you talk about how old is it?
This is a 5-year-old Dell laptop, so it's running a Quattro. Forget the chip generation. I know it's just 200 cores, so it's CUDA 2.0 generation. I'm working at home on CUDA 6.0. So the code I'm showing you here is really the sample code from the CUDA development kit. Now, it happens that I've actually taken graphics DirectX sample code, because I'm writing is hybrid CUDA DirectX code. So if you want to do physics, then you just do that in CUDA, and then you can look at text to see the results. If I want to do graphics, you want to do that in DirectX, but CUDA can interact directly on the GPU between OpenGL and DirectX. So I've taken, these are samples of NVIDIA samples that I've ported the physics engines and libraries over to CUDA, then integrated them with DirectX so that it's all running on the GPU. And then the stuff I run at home on CUDA 6 is all much more advanced CUDA implementations of the physics and simulation stuff. That's my code in order to do this. So what's interesting is that you can just do this in DirectX, but this is actually all running on the CUDA cores for this architecture. And you can see it's chugging, but it's still pretty amazing for a laptop that's 5 years old with 200 CUDA cores. If you put it on a modern 680 or 690, it's ridiculous. Other questions? Everybody stunned silence. Yeah, so you don't have to be polite. We can just sit here quietly and
We were
munch
talking a
cookies.
little bit about the different data structures for the modern world. How, are you addressing those, or how, just basically from someone who maybe knows C++,
Yeah.
someone who's playing around there, how do they make the jump over to?
Well, I'll tell you, I thought I was kind of on the cutting edge of this, but I saw something that stunned me a few days ago. I got to be vague because I'm working with these guys. But these radio astronomers are all trying to find pulsars at the edge of the universe using supercomputers. The data they're getting from these radio telescopes is enormous and full of noise. The math these guys do to find pulsars at the edge of the universe and the sea of data is astounding. These are some smart guys. But they aren't necessarily professional software developers with a lot of experience at GPU programming. So these guys said, hey, Alex, could you look at us, maybe suggest some ways to optimize these algorithms? So they sent me a bunch of undiscovered pulsars. We only know of 1,500 pulsars. We need to find hundreds of thousands to map the universe. So they sent me some of the code they were using for finding pulsars, which I've been working with directly. And one of the guys sends me an algorithm going, can you improve the performance on this? And I took a look at the code and I thought, oh, this is crap, no problem. 15 minutes work, I'm going to get him 40%. This will be really helpful for him. So I worked on a little bit, ran my test code slower. Huh, that should have been easy. Work on it again, changed a little bit, slower again. All right, now I get really neurotic obsessed. I spend 2 weeks on it. I beat my head, I rewrite it 6 different ways. I am all over this thing. I'm cutting it up. I'm using new undocumented assembly language instructions to shuffle things around that nobody can possibly know about because I'm the only one who gets the stuff from NVIDIA first. Can't beat this guy's algorithm. And finally I call him up. I go, dude, I don't know what you did, but I cannot beat this thing. And he says, well, are you just looking at the single thread code? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, so he had an array he was indexing, and each index into this array of memory had a cosine of a floating point number he was multiplying by that array index by, and it was kind of a wavy function. And I just assume it's signal processing, so they're doing some weird harmonic thing to weave through all the frequencies of the Fourier transform, and so it was just some physics thing I didn't need to understand. Well, what he'd done was to get coalescence of all the parallel threads such that every bank of memory loaded in parallel out of the cache is he'd taken a linear array and rippled it with this cosine function so that coalescence rippled across the threads in parallel every time they did a load, and there was never an overlapped memory read. And everything was coming out of the cache at optimal performance because the Kepler chips did it. I'd never seen anything like that before. I was like, oh God, you are kidding me. I'm embarrassed. It never even occurred to me that you would be writing code like that on these things to get performance because it looks like crap. And so I'm sitting here going, oh God, I'm going to have to tell these guys they taught me something. So I had to go, dude, I got to say, that's brilliant. I never even considered that you'd have to do something that weird to a thread in order to get massive parallel efficiency. And as I worked on my own code, I kept running into that. Just, oh, you cannot think the way you used to think. You got to give it up. It's just wrong. And that's hard to adjust to. And so all these classic data structures, I was telling Owen about hash tables. Hash tables, fastest known way we know to look something up in constant time of any arbitrary sparse scale. And hash tables, in order to work, require a randomness. So there's some magic to randomness that makes the fastest known way we have to look things up absolutely essential to have good quality randomness. And randomness is disaster on a GPU because randomness is the worst case scenario for lots of collisions and trying to coalesce memory. And so one of the things I quickly realized is I need to build data structures on my GPU that have hash table performance, but they cannot be random. And so the algorithmist in me is going, I've got to think. It seems to me that there has to be some formulation of a hash table that achieves this performance, that transforms the randomness into some domain that doesn't cause this memory collision. And I spent ages beating my head over the problem and found a data structure that does that, and it's the only one I know of. So I went through the literature going, I first would have found a hash table performance algorithm that is completely ordered and coalesces. So I've got a really exotic data structure I've been working on that takes a huge amount of work because they're very complicated, these things, that has the same performance as a hash table for arbitrarily huge data, but goes like a bat out of hell on a GPU. I call it a hyperspace partition. It's related to something I found I learned in the ray tracing world. So I've been sitting there killing myself to get this thing working so I can build really huge universes just full of atoms and full of cells and be able to calculate all the interactions between all of them as fast as humanly possible. And so it made me quickly realize that very quickly everything you're learning in algorithms and data science, you're probably going to have to go, that's good reference material, but I got to rethink this stuff. And the thing you keep running into is just not only are the tools and algorithms that you are used to having on a regular platform not available yet on the GPU, they're often weirdly irrelevant as well. And so that's one of the things that I could wax on about it, how interesting it is to me, but it is one of the exciting things is you guys get to invite and write the next textbooks. You guys will be the professors teaching the next thing because it hasn't been found yet. Yeah.
So are you saying we're wasting our time going to school?
No. Well, I never bothered to graduate, but no. You know, the thing I regret is that I have a dirty secret, which is one of the ways I cope with my lack of formal education is I lean heavily on Mathematica to solve equations for me. And my daughter, who went through the complete rigorous thing, whenever she's over visiting, I'll be like there cranking away at Mathematica, holding my head and going, okay, how do I solve this thing? And if my daughter's there, she goes, Dad, I'll take care of it, and napkin hands it back to me. And I go, you know, if I had bothered just to stick around in college and learn this stuff, I'd be able to do that too. I got to use Mathematica to help me along. And so a lot of the algorithms, and I still go, okay, how, in order to think about how you make a hash table that has hash table performance, you have to understand the performance characteristics and the math and the big O notation and the way of thinking about all traditional data structures in order to understand how to assemble those new ones. So I still end up with my classical algorithms and data structures books going, okay, so one, why I made an embarrassing mistake the first time I started this, really humiliating. I thought I beat the hell out of a hash table and was wrong. And it wasn't until I computed the performance and then went, wait, oh, that's the same speed as a binary tree. I'm an idiot. After I bragged to my friends that I'd solved it, so I said, shut up for a while, made sure I verified my algorithm against all of the known algorithms because I was, you know, it was complicated. And then I go, okay, now I think I've got it. But don't brag about it and don't be throwing numbers around until you're absolutely sure. So all of it is absolutely valuable. It's a foundation that you're going to have to build that on. What I'm saying is you should be very excited about it. And the foundation, the thing that I would say to students today is just do not skip on the math. The more advanced you are in mathematics and abstraction, the more valuable you're going to be flat out. It's all going to be, all these computers are going to be using, screw, you know, keeping track of a database. I'm going to be calculating genetic systems, physics, and life. That's what your careers are going to be about. So you better have the math aptitude to understand that stuff because that's where the big dollars and the big research is going to come from with computers this powerful.
So I'm going to cut it out so we have still have the next video section. So thank you, Alex.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.